Hey guys, Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks. Welcome back. We have an important show, an important topic, an important guest for you today. The topic is trade cheating. So, not playing fairly in the game of manufacturing and selling what you make, especially internationally. And David Rashid is an expert on it. He learned the hard way through his own harsh experience in encountering that problem and trying to deal with it. So he's here to fill us in on what constitutes trade cheating, why it's so awful, what he's run into trying to fix it, and what you might be able to do yourself in jumping on the bandwagon and helping out. So David's going to be with us in just a second. Stay tuned right here on Manufacturing Talks.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
David, welcome to Manufacturing Talks. How are you?
I'm great, Jim. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. This is a vital topic, and I have been very much looking forward to the discussion, so I can't wait to dig in. But before we do, why don't you just tell us a little about yourself and how you got doing what you're doing today?
Okay, so let's see. I started my career in manufacturing. I started working for a company called Royal Laser. We used lasers to cut steel. I started as an operator, with the promise to grow into management if I did well.
Started on the floor. You're already
guy.
speaking my language.
What's that?
He started on the floor, the factory floor.
Yeah,
right up my alley. Good.
That's right. After graduating with a degree in economics.
Oh,
but that's a whole other story.
Uh-huh.
But the bottom line was like I was, I like doing. I'm not a handy guy, but I like the idea of producing things. I was tired of generating reports for the sake of a report, right? And then it goes in the garbage after it got the grade.
Yeah.
And so, I thought it was interesting. I learned how to program. I learned about the different steels. I was the only operator ever shoot himself with the laser when I was focusing. So that was a clear message. But then I ended up helping the company raise money, and then it eventually went public. And so I ended up working with more on the finance side. But I had this really, I had a deep understanding of the business, which allowed me to, really promote it in a way that, a regular finance person couldn't. And so that got me started into finance and into manufacturing. And then several years later, I did my grad work in strategic cost management. I'd done some non-for-profit work in Latin America. And so I had it in my head that I wanted to do manufacturing, and I wanted to do it in a Spanish-speaking country because I just wanted to practice my Spanish. And so I ended up working for a multinational tier one in Mexico, and I started building fuel systems, really fuel lines, brake lines, fuel filler necks. And my boss was a tool and die maker, so he made sure I understood, how the tooling and the equipment interacted in order to make the parts. And it was a great learning experience, tremendous.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
neat.
Started with one plant, and then two plants, and then I took a stamping plant over, and I took another stamping plant over, and I ended up growing a portfolio of companies in Mexico, and then I had global responsibility given to me. So then I started a plant in Shanghai, I started a plant in Slovakia, and then I had plants in the US and Canada as well. So I had that global perspective on manufacturing. And then after doing that for 17 years and having a heck of a time, it was challenging, but it was very rewarding because we grew the business profitably and we grew it in leaps and bounds. Then eventually I moved on and I joined a company called Blues and Edelman, where I am today. And we also make a fluid handling product for power steering, hydraulic power steering, which is on its way out, but we service the aftermarket. So the car park, in the United States is nearing 300 million, and the amount of hydraulic steering cars on the market still well exceeds 100 million, and so there's still
Mhm.
a big demand out there for this product.
Sure.
And so we also manufacture pumps, racks, and gears, and we also supply to the e-steer market. And so, but hydraulic steering hoses is a big aspect of our business, and that really is the product that has caused me to be thrust into the world of trade crime and trade enforcement and the whole thing.
That was a marvelous segue. But before we dive into that, I gotta say, I mean, your background is just amazing. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I tout myself as an expert, and you're more expert than I am. I love that you came up from the factory floor, and I love that you had that finance experience too. I've spent a lot of time looking into some of the vagaries around, how we value productive assets here in America and how that helped drive things offshore as well. Probably have some interesting discussions around that, but that's not why we're here today. Just wanted to
Right,
mention that in passing. Yeah, so you mentioned it, trade crime and all of that, which not a lot of people think about, right?
right,
Which
right.
is unfortunate.
Well, I didn't think about it until it happened to me, right? And
Good
this is
point. Yep.
typically how it plays out, right? So I don't blame anyone, and it's complex, to be honest with you. Like, it's not
Yeah.
easy to understand, and I think that is a challenge um, with these things, because if it were easy, I think it would honestly probably be we'd be further along in the enforcement
Right.
journey here. But anyway, so would you like me to just jump into that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't you just start with kind of the 10,000-foot level of what you've learned, and then we can dive into some of the details that are most important.
Sure. So, real quickly, how we got into it. I manufactured hydraulic fluid hose product my entire career, along with stampings and so forth. But I have a deep experience there, and I manufacture them in China. So I felt like I had a good understanding of the global cost structure of what it means to make one of these things, right?
Mhm.
And so when I got involved with Plus and Edelman, I looked at their cost structure and I felt like there were opportunities to improve, but we weren't way off the mark. And it's not just about the cost of manufacturing; it's the cost of delivery. It's your ability to fulfill the customer's needs at the um, at the service levels that they require. And so I felt like we were generally in a good position. But what I realized was that somehow or another, our competitor could, come in lower than our costs,
Mhm.
or rather lower than our price and near our costs. I couldn't figure it out. Um, and so we were losing business. This was in early 2018, we were losing business. And that's when I joined the firm. And I was brought in to help turn it around. And then when President Trump implemented the Section 301 tariffs at 10%, that was list three for auto parts, I was very excited. I thought, great, at least 10% probably won't cut it, but that should help. And then in 2019, those list three tariffs went to 25%. And so I thought, okay, this is a game changer. This ought to give us a chance to compete again. But what we had been told by our customers was that our competitor hadn't raised their prices, which was very odd since
Mm.
they were manufacturing in China and
Mhm.
shipping directly to their facilities in Ohio. And so this caused me to do some investigation. And I was convinced that they were cheating. And so we went to the retail store to pick up some automotive hose product from our competitor. And what we realized was they were claiming they were shipping from Thailand. It said made in Thailand on the bag.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, hold on, these guys have a massive facility in China. We're not aware of any manufacturing in Thailand.
Yeah.
And so I ended up hiring some investigators. They were ex-Mossad people, which was interesting. Through a friend, I met these people, and they were great. They were great to work with, professionals.
Yep.
And they were able to gather information and help me determine that, in fact, product was moving from China to Thailand, going through 2 different companies, and then out the door to the United States. We were able to get financial records, and this was pretty cool, Jim. Like, I got the financial records of company A and company B, and I was able to therefore see before the trade crime, sales were very low. And then once the trade crime started, their sales tripled, both of them, right? Their cost of goods went up 1 for 1, right? So you can imagine if their sales went up by $10, right? Or in this case, call it $5 million, their cost of goods sold went up by $5 million. And their operating expenses stayed the same, and they didn't invest in any additional assets. And you're like, how do you triple the size of your business, right?
A miracle.
Not spend any more in operating expenses, not invest in any capital, and not generate any more profit.
Yeah.
So
a whole bunch of people all over the world who'd love to know that, right?
Well, I mean, like, there was no benefit accruing therefore, because the profit never changed. So I'm like, what is this? And so clearly it's someone termed it warehouse economics, which is probably a great way to talk about it. So anyway, and then we took the product to the labs, and we figured out that the product from China, which we had, was no different than the product from Thailand. And so with all this information, I found some lawyers. They suggested we go through a False Claims Act process, which is one of the processes available to people who are seeking justice on this topic. So you basically you present your case to the government, and you invite them to intervene. It's called the False Claims Act. And so we submitted the information. We thought that this was a slam dunk, and 6 months later, we were told it's a no-go. We then filed an e-allegation. We spoke to senior people at Customs and Border Protection to determine what the likelihood was that something would be done. We didn't get a warm and fuzzy. And so we submitted, but I knew that couldn't be the end of it. I went back to my law firm and I said, look, guys, I need another solution. I can't live with just submitting into a black box.
Yep.
And they had just hired someone who had come from the Trade Fraud Task Force, which is this like tiny little group inside the commercial litigation branch of the DOJ at that time. And so he said, David, I have friends inside the DOJ who would be interested in this case. And so we were able to submit to this small group inside the DOJ, and then they ran with it. And they were great. Gentleman by the name of William Canellis was running it. And then everybody else apparently was on loan. So, the way it worked, no one else was dedicated. He was the only one, but he was very passionate about it.
Yep.
So it took us about a year, and then we thought we were in good shape based on the questions that we were getting. And then one day they just said, sorry, we have no more updates for you, and we don't need any more information from you. And I asked my attorney what I should do, and he said, go to Washington. So, this is unfortunately not a unique story. What's unique is that I got to actually work with the Trade Fraud Task Force.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, what's unique is you had resources most people aren't going to have, right?
Yeah, but that was it. So I took it to Washington, and that's another chapter. But if we're focused on trade crime, what I would tell you is that I talk to people today who are just starting to advocate on behalf of their companies, and the stories aren't different. they're having a heck of a time getting through. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions, and then we keep going.
Well, an observation, first of all, is that you've been through it and lived it and kind of been fighting the good fight for literally years now. And so the infuriating aspect of it doesn't come through. And that's what I think people ought to feel, is that our country is being literally attacked, right? There's this concerted effort by a hostile power to undermine our ability to make things for ourselves. And we've got all these things going on to reindustrialize, but if we don't get this fixed, it's like treading water to some degree.
Well, a lot of people feel that they're alone, right? I mean, I certainly felt like I was alone. And then I expressed my concerns to a friend, and he said, "Yeah, David, this is who's been involved in international trade for a long time." And he said, "David, this is something that the government rarely does anything about. Good luck." And I thought, good luck. Something's changed here, though, right? Where now with these Section 301 tariffs, everybody's going to be exposed to this. And then people have to decide, am I going to import legally or am I going to import illegally, right? And then you have this bifurcation, right? And then this is where it becomes now much more problematic than it once was. I mean, you always had tariffs at certain levels, like you had certain industries protected with, 232s and so forth, whether it be steel, aluminum, et cetera. But those were and they were finding ways to get justice through very specialized legal tools like ADC, anti-dumping countervailing duty laws, and Enforce and Protect Act legislation that's gone through that allows them to pursue specific channels. But that requires a level of sophistication, right? You have to prove harm to your industry. It's a very long process to get anti-dumping countervailing duties imposed for your industry, and then when you detect cheating, you have to file an Enforce and Protect Act, and that costs a lot of money. So I mean, to get an ADCVD takes a lot of time. And how much time does a company have is the question.
And money.
Right. And money.
Yeah.
Before you have to shut the doors.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, to some degree, the attacker can just play the waiting game.
Yes. I did a study. I was working with the House Judiciary Committee because, fast forward, we become one of so we're advocating for reform in this area. We're advocating for more resources, more transparency as it relates to the government's performance on enforcing this. And we're supporting legislation that closes loopholes, like the non-resident importer loophole, like the minimis was a lovely win, not necessarily for my business, but certainly for people in my industry and across other industries. Major win.
Can you describe that a little? I'm aware of it, but just for people who are watching who may not be.
De minimis. De minimis, what it allowed was goods, shipments under $800 to come in exempt from tariffs. And so it was just interesting. So, and I think the intention was, if I'm not mistaken, it was more for, casual trips. People would bring home gifts, and they would, not have to pay duties on those items. What it turned into was companies importing mass quantities of product into places like Mexico and Canada, and then shipping these things in to the United States, and not hitting that $800 threshold, if they valued it accurately. I mean, and then in other cases, you had companies bringing in, I was told, multiple ton products and claiming, a very low value as well. So that's an undervaluation law that they broke. right? They're undervaluing the product. They bring it in, but using the de minimis exemption. And so they've ended the de minimis exemption. And obviously, that doesn't mean that the problem is over, because you still have undervaluation, which therefore reduces, how much someone pays in terms of tariffs. You have other ways to cheat the system, but at least this one massive loophole was closed down. So, there are other loopholes that we're focused on,
Right.
like the non-resident importer loophole, which basically means you can import product into the United States and not have nexus in the United States, and therefore not have any liability associated with fraudulent behavior in the United States. That doesn't make sense. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense, because I write and speak constantly about the challenges, that kind of the biggest hurdles we have toward bringing more manufacturing back to America. And so, regulations being one, corrupt unionism being one, energy costs being one. When we look at how things play, how much of this cheating aspect would you say, how does that weigh in with those other challenges that American manufacturing faces?
Insofar as tariffs are an important aspect of reindustrialization and reshoring, because tariff integrity is really what we're talking about here. If you don't enforce the rules, right, then there's a tremendous incentive to cheat.
Yeah.
And so any industry that's relying on tariffs today to level the field, right, from a cost perspective, is at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which we can certainly rattle through those that have been tremendously hollowed out. I mean, textiles and apparel comes to mind immediately, and I know that was one that was getting particularly hit with the de minimis violations, and can only imagine it's similar with here. But even I've been hitting shipbuilding a lot, but shipbuilding obviously relies on millions of providers of all the small parts that go into a ship, and I have to believe that would be ripe for this kind of cheating.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you think about just the amount, historically, the amount of steel and aluminum coming in to the country that was just, eroding our ability to produce
Right.
those commodities. It's just tremendous. So, yeah, I'm glad we've woken up. I'm so glad that we've woken up. But the system is slow, Jim. The system is so slow to respond, and I'm so perturbed by just how slow. Not just it's not about this government, right? Like, in fact, many would argue this government's done more than any other previous government to address this issue.
Yeah, for sure.
And I get that enforcement is complicated, and it's it's in the weeds. But if we don't get this right, I mean, we've looked at other people's studies, and we've developed our own studies on just how much cheating is going on. And the number that we've come to, if you look at the list 1, 2, 3, and 4 that the USTR identified back in 2018 and 2019, on which 301 tariffs were applied. You take the rate and you take those lists and the value of those lists, and you assume static trade with China, meaning the value of those lists neither went up or down. We should have captured just over 500 billion. CBP relays a number in terms of tariffs assessed, and they claim to have assessed about just over half, something like 53% of that number, which means, either demand was destroyed in the United States for those categories, or there was a legitimate, alternative source for that product, or there's cheating.
Yeah, the first two not being particularly likely, right?
Right. I mean, if you look at how much China has increased their manufacturing exports, I think it's gone from something like mid 2 trillions to mid 3 trillions over that same period. And the United States had, initially accounted for over 20% of China's total exports. So you're telling me they could grow that much without relying on US demand? And so then you say, well, if they're still getting it through, how are they doing it? And then at what scale? And then you say, oh my goodness, is it possible? And I'm just looking at 301 tariffs. I'm not even talking about 232 tariffs. I'm not talking about the IEPAs, which, have problems.
Well, and that raises a great point. You say we're waking up, but are we truly? I mean, first of all, this doesn't seem to be getting a lot of traction in the media. And second, it just sounds like we've kind of peeled the corner of the rug back a little bit, but we're not really grasping the entirety of the problem.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think, and there's so many issues there, right? Like, again, first, I think it's complicated, and therefore I think there are many well-intentioned people, and I think there are many smart people.
Yeah.
But, I was talking to people who are experts in this, in prosecuting trade crime. I know a few.
Yeah.
As one can imagine, as you dive into these things, you want to talk to everybody who can help you better understand what the problem is.
Yep.
And they've all said the same thing. It's just, it's that it takes years to build an expertise in how to learn how to build a case and prosecute a case. And we don't have a lot of those people out there today. So there's a genuine constraint there from that perspective. And then on top of that, there are, for example, HSI, I was reading a Bloomberg article where they were talking about Homeland Security investigations, has basically defunded the Global Trade Investigations Unit, which supports the investigation work of CBP and DOJ on trade crimes in order to support immigration. And I'm absolutely convinced that the government didn't do this to harm trade crime. There was a, hey, Rush, let's enforce, our immigration mandate. But unfortunately, other things suffer as a result. Yeah. And again, I get it. I get it. So things like that occur, right? So you have a resource constraint, whether it's because you have few experts. You have a resource constraint because, resources are moved from A to B. Yeah. But, when I look at legislative initiatives in Congress, there are people who have no interest in seeing the status quo changed as well.
Right.
And that's a big problem. Right? So we've been backing a bill for a straightforward bill, right? It just says, hey, look, let's dedicate some money to trade crime enforcement. And let's put a group together and let's give them some kind of coordinating authority and let's have them train others. And let's have them report out on their performance through the Attorney General to Congress every year. This bill was presented back introduced in the 118th Congress. It was again introduced in the 119th Congress. And it can't, like, we're waiting for House Judiciary to mark it up. Mm-hmm. And we're almost at the end of the 119th Congress.
Yep.
And, I'm aware of other bills that, support other aspects of trade crime enforcement that have been shut down by, whether it be the packaging and logistics companies because it's cost too much to support in terms of compliance.
Yeah.
And it's just disgusting. And so we formed a group called the Alliance for Trade Enforcement now. And when
I was just about to ask what the concrete action that people who are aware of the problem and might want to participate in creating solutions can do. It sounds like this is the path.
Yeah, I mean, I think education, when I got into this, I knew nothing. And then it took a long time for me to try to understand, the lay of the land.
Yeah, and you had that kind of unique situation of something very stark that caught your attention and drove you to do that, which may not be the case with most people.
Yeah. So I joined a group called Coalition for a Prosperous America.
Yep.
And they have great organization, by the way. Can't
Yeah.
say enough good things about how they work and who leads that group. A gentleman by the name of John Toomey and Nick Yachiavella, great guys, and then Charles Benoit is their trade counsel, but many others as well in there. But point is, I found someone who could listen and who could then, help me begin to understand, how they have other members who are affected, and so I started speaking with them, and then we ended up building an educational resource, which is our website. And its
We'll
primary
include
purpose,
a link to that in the show description.
awesome, yeah, and its primary purpose is to educate staffers, media, and impacted like people who just have an interest in this to go online and better understand what the situation is about, how it came to be, what the tools are that people can use, what the stats are. We developed a statistical database for people in the House Judiciary Committee, where we were able to show them, look, there's only about 8 to 10 cases that get to the DOJ and get prosecuted each year, and the total value of those cases, like there are a few big cases, but we're talking about, I think it was 30 million in 2023, about 30 million in 2024, and then in 2025 they were able to capture about 180 some odd million, something like this.
Yep.
In total dollars. But we're talking about an issue that's tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions, call it tens of billions of dollars a year, and you're capturing a very small amount, right? And
Lots
these
of work
cases,
to be done.
from first crime to settlement, the average is 8.3 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, we put together this website. We work with people on the Hill to educate their offices on the legislation that's out there that can help take a bite out of trade crime. Right. And
to adopt the phrase, right?
Yeah. And then we also work with groups like Alliance for American Manufacturers.
Yep.
We work with groups like we were talking to the Aluminum Association last week, educating them on all of the different pieces of legislation that are out there. We work with a group called American Moment, which is like a fascinating group of young 20-somethings that are very focused on recruiting, training, and placing conservative staffers across the spectrum in DC. And so we're building a learning module with them. So we're very focused on the education piece. We're focused, whether we're educating people in Congress or whether we're educating, and then obviously supporting them. And so that's really what we're doing today, because I believe strongly, as many of us as founding members believe, that without education, this thing is gonna stay stuck where it's at. So we're very focused on the education piece. Good.
Well, we're about out of time. Any closing thoughts, David?
No, I appreciate your interest, Jim. I really do. And anyone is interested in trade crime, I welcome them to visit the site. And if they want to reach out and learn more in terms of how they can, add their voice, I welcome them to communicate with me directly. And that's about it.
Yep. So Dave's on LinkedIn. You can certainly connect with him there. We'll have the link to his website in the show description, and help out, spread the word. This is definitely something that needs to get a lot more focus and a lot more attention. We'll do our part to spread the word as well. So thanks again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, not the greatest subject in the world, and kind of bad news in some regards, but also good news in that David has identified not only the problem, but things you can do about it. So definitely check out his site. If you want to join forces or just need more information, reach out to him on LinkedIn or at his website. And let's get after it. I mean, that's obviously a key part of reindustrialization of America, is making sure that we're playing on a level playing field and holding cheaters accountable. So for next week, we have a really fun show, because we've got two guests I've had on recently about shipbuilding back. So I've got Lance Lemcool and Colin Grayboe, and both very knowledgeable, but agree on some things, disagree on others. We're going to have an open discussion and see where that leads us next week. So join us then. Join us every Tuesday here on Manufacturing Talks. Until then, Jim Vinosky signing off.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.